Hi. Last time we had just did a big bunch of her hair on the right side, and this time we're going to concentrate on actually finishing Lydia. She should be thrilled because she's off at school right now. She hasn't seen my progress, but she should be home shortly, and we'll see what the live model says when she sees it. Right now, today, I'm going to actually finish the top. I'm going to put some shadows in. This is not a hair, it's a shadow as a result of that hair right there. The trick is to blend it. Shadows are not so consciously straight. They kind of dissipate. And what we're going to do is put a little bit of color to match the skin so it's not so sudden. We're going to blend it in ever so gently. And the way to do that is to have a little bit of water on the brush. The trick is to try to make its approach to flesh not so sudden. At a certain point, you actually use a dry brush for the actual blending. And completely dry. We're going to make this skin tone we'll try to assimilate exactly what we had. So we're going to go on this side, and as you can see, it's just ever so close to it. The shadow is going to be very gradual, as all shadows are, or should be. We're going to do the same thing under the eye, just ever so gradual. Now, as you know, all ladies do not like to have their shadows maximized or even considered. We're not going to make a big deal out of this. We're simply going to put a light tone there. Blend it in ever so gradually. Blend it into the skin just like we did on top. And there you go. Doesn't even have a presence. It just simply happens. The brush is almost dry. It's got just a little bit of color on it, and what's going to happen is going to blend in ever so nicely. Let's do the same thing with that one. A little bit too light. We'll go into here one more time. The shadow kind of dissipates a little bit once it goes into her cheek, because the cheek is one muscle that rises a bit. And a shadow, as much as you'd like to admit its presence, you're going to have to pretty much not paint it because it'll look a bit like a scar almost, and we can't have that. So instead, we're going to just acknowledge it lightly. The hair is what causes the shadow. And we're going to just gradually show the shadow's existence. You're going to laugh at this, but this is basically, this whole painting so far is just a color treatment. On my own, I'll probably take this and really spend a lot of time redoing the whole thing. This is just a color treatment, just a way for me to look at it and say, I guess I could go further. All of my paintings are done the same way. I do a pencil first. The pencil is just to acknowledge the backbones of it, the existence of an idea. Later on, this is a color treatment. What I do is I apply color to the backbones and see if that, in a sense, makes reason to go further. And so far, Lydia's face is interesting. It'll work. I kind of like the expression. It worked out very nicely. I always treat all paintings into two categories. The categories are whether I would like it for my own collection, let's say for my own private collection, and Lydia's going to be one of those. I like the way it's turning out, and I'll probably hold on to this. It's a good example of my work. The other type of work is what I put into the secondary category, and that's what I do for business. People commission me to do a portrait. Now, don't get me wrong, I will do the best I can. It's just as bit as good as what I do for my own. But it's a different type of mind spell on it. You almost got to realize that it's a commission. You have to part with it. It cannot nearly be as good as what you want it to be. That's just the way it is. And I do a fair amount. I think for every painting I do for myself, I do an equal amount just for commission's sake, whatever. You have to survive. And it's a good challenge. It's a good way to keep yourself flexible. And you learn. From everything you do, you learn a little bit of something more about the trade. There hasn't been a single painting I've ever done that has not brought something into my thinking. All right, I kind of blended the shadow pretty nicely. It's faded away. I'm going to put a little bit more flesh tone towards the nose because I think it's a little bit too dark there. It's pretty good. I'm going to make this disappear as it goes down because I don't want her face to be that dark. This is good enough for what I want to do. Now, we'll darken a little bit under the eye. We still got to do the finish the hair, and I still got to do a little bit more of the shadows. But for now, I'm going to be able to survive with this information. I'll be able to go further with it. There's shadow underneath that here. It looks like there's a big gap of white there. And you could pretty much live with that when you are going to your next layering. I don't want her to look like she's got a black eye either. We have to be very careful. I'm going to take a little bit of that pink, a little bit of white, blend it right into the skin tone so it doesn't look too intense. Not bad. You got to be real careful about any type of shadow under an eye. The more you put, the more intense it looks, the more depressed the person looks, the more sad. You're adding to the demeanor. You got to be careful about that. You don't want it to be too, you don't want it to change the whole look or appearance. A little thing like that could add so much. It could not necessarily be accurate. It could actually be negative. All right, we got to fix that a little. Got a little bit too white there. So we're going to go back into this. A little bit of red. Take a little bit of that. Mix it all up with more of the Payne's gray. Let's see how that works. I just don't want it that light. It just looked a tad too light to me. I don't want that corner of the eye to be that light. I don't want it to be that dark either. It's going to be an interesting combination. That should do it. The one thing I pride myself, I developed over the years a pretty good knack of blending colors. And it's a very hard thing. I'll be the first to admit it didn't happen overnight. And you know, it's funny, it's a whole different mind thing when you're doing oils and acrylics. You don't, it's a whole different way of blending. Oils blend much nicer, but they take a long time to dry. And for that, you really got to be careful. I tend to like oil for one purpose and I like acrylic for another. Okay, I'm going to blend it in real nicely, and that's the end of that. We'll go back into the hair. This will do it for that part of the face. I'm probably going to make it lighter because I think it's a little bit too dark. Let's see what I could do by making it lighter. A little bit of white, and we'll do that. Makes sense. Get rid of all the paint on your brush, blend it in ever so nicely, and see what happens. All I'm trying to do is get rid of the remaining white. Put a little shadow on this side. That's one thing I have to do. A little bit of water because the studio lights make the paint dry. Acrylic is terrible for going dry. So I want to put a little shadow under the hair. It's going to go right up to the hair. There's not going to be any white. And basically it's just a shadow. It's actually adds to the drama of the effect. You can't just have hair going right up to the skin. You have to show a displacement factor. And that's what that's going to be. The other trick is to blend it very nicely. And the next step, that would be using just a decent amount of skin tone, which would be portrait pink, which I'm not crazy about. So we're going to blend a little bit of that portrait pink with that shadow effect. A dry brush, blend it in ever so nicely like this. Now with a dry brush, I'm going to go back into this and introduce the cheek to the shadow. That's going to help me later on when I'm going to go back to this painting and reintroduce everything. Hopefully I don't have to have too much to do because hopefully all this will work. But knowing me, I'll probably change a lot. It's good not to be too accepting of an original idea. It's always good to change stuff around and look for change. I think when you accept too much, you're going to be a victim and you're going to get lazy. I don't want to get into that syndrome. All right, that's a good little blending right there. I almost don't believe in good luck. Sometimes you really have to work hard to get something going. And if it comes too quickly, I'm nervous. I don't believe in good luck. It'd be nice. Sometimes things do happen. Your original painting is just so good you don't want to dare risk ruining it, so you will acknowledge. Hasn't happened yet, but I guess it will someday. All right, I'm going to have to blend this better eventually, but this is the idea. The cheek is going to go right into that shadow. You won't be able to tell where one begins and where one ends. Nice effect. I'm going to have to really blend it better. But right now, the idea is there, and that's all I care about. Okay. Let's get the hair done. That will be the, I'm going to get some more of the raw umber and burnt umber. That's what these two are. I'm looking at the photograph and I noticed that it's not It's a situation where you're going to actually not use white. You're going to use more of a tan. It's really called, it's kind of a titanium, but I don't want to use anything that's too white. So I'm just going to blend in certain tones. I'm also going to use a fine brush. Probably not that fine, probably this one. I want to have a little oomph behind the brush. A little bit more water. I'm looking at the photograph, and never was there really a really bright hair. It's always a cross between a little raw umber and a little bit of the titanium. It's just a little bit like this. We're going to do a couple of hairs this way. So I'm going to do a couple of narrow lines. I would like to get as much of this done right now. Actually, I want to use this guy. And the situation on top is there's a series of light against dark. Light strands against dark strands. And that's exactly what we're going to do. It takes a while to get the consistency right. You want to have enough pigmentation on your brush. You don't want it to be too watery. This is not watercolor, it's acrylic. But you do want some substance on your brush. That's coming out good. So I'm putting the light first. Doesn't have to be. You know, there's an old argument, what's more important, you put the light in or the dark in? I think in a case like this, it really doesn't matter which one you do first. You're going to have to go back over it anyway. I myself like to do the dark first. This time it just so happened my brush had a lot of light paint on it, so I'm going to go with that first. We'll do a couple more that got the brush all light. And again, the studio lights are making the paint dry right in front of my eyes. When you have a lot of pigmentation and it's not so much watery, that's what's going to happen. The paint's going to dry very quickly. And the funny thing is, I really didn't use anything too light. Later on, when I'm all said and done, I'll probably put a couple of light highlights in. But too much is not called for. It's a little obvious. It's always good to put highlights in the eye. A little twinkle now and then is incredible. Now, I'm going to show you what effect a little bit of dark behind these light hairs will bring. And I got to put some shadow under those too. Just a couple more. Let's take the broad brush, the thick one, and put a little shadow on her forehead. That's the same thing we used before. A little bit of flesh tone, a little bit of gray, and a little bit of raw umber. It's not just one color. I wish people would not paint with paint fresh out of the tube, because it doesn't make sense. Let's make that a bit darker. A little bit of Payne's Gray in the mix. A little bit more Payne's Gray. It looks a little bit too light. Let's, at this point, mix in a little bit of the pink, a little bit more of the unbleached titanium, we want to make it into a kind of shadow effect. So we're going to go for unbleached titanium, a little bit of the light. Let's see what happens now. I want it to go right into the forehead. Not bad. And yet I want it to have a nice shadow effect too. Because there's a shadow. Her hair does have a shadow. There's no light bulb up there. No source of light coming between the hair and the forehead. Now the trick is going to be blending the two. The trick is also that one paint has been dry for several weeks, and the paint I'm putting now is rather wet. The trick is to make these two look at each other and acknowledge each other nicely. And you can't see the difference. That is a real trick. The trick there is a dry brush. You take these paints, and with a dry brush, introduce them graciously. Hopefully it'll work. Not bad. You take a little bit of the lighter paint and just carefully blend the two together. Notice my brush is relatively dry. Make this lighter and lighter. A little bit of white. Let's see what happens. I don't want it to be too light, because let's face it, there is a shadow there. And you do have to acknowledge it, but the trick is to make it very gentle. So a nice dry brush at this point, with absolutely no paint on it whatsoever, might be in order. So basically the brush is just damp. Do the same thing. The thing about a damp brush, it looks like there's paint on it when you first apply any effort on it, but it'll dry quickly. And before you know it, there's no evidence of any color. You might actually move some of the color from on top, so you got to be careful. I'm actually dragging some color from on top. Just got to be careful. Well, in any event, it's not nearly as intense as it was. So what we're going to do now, I'd like to get one or two more of these in quickly. And just to show you the direction we're going in, I'm going to actually attach these two together, put a little bit more water in the brush because it's drying out again. I'm going to put all sorts of different light colors on this now, because when I'm attaching these two together, it goes into a lighter. And basically at this point, I'm just trying to attach the hairs. I just wanted to make kind of a sense. That shadow really makes a difference. I'm going to really work on blending it better. Right now it's just a presence. Also want to fill in this gap. Watch what a difference this makes when you put a little dark behind those lights. I think I'm going to actually finish Lydia on my own. So next time I'm going to start a new canvas. And but actually the next program I'm probably going to do something you might find interesting. I'm going to do a floral treatment. But I'll go a little step further. I'm going to show you how to draw on a canvas and how to make that canvas work. A lot of people don't like to draw on a canvas, but I do. I like to create a backbone that I could refer to constantly. Well, this might be the last time you see Lydia for a while.